Good morning. Still morning. It's 11:30. Welcome everyone to the June Planning Commission Agenda Review Meeting. Glad everyone's here. Chair Hill had a previous obligation that he couldn't get out of, and so you're stuck with me today. We will start with a familiar face. Director Brooks, for your report.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. A few updates before we turn it over to our guest speaker. So staff recently released the 2022 Development Activity Report. It has been promoted on our website and via lead news article, and it was apparently covered in last weekend's News Sentinel, so you might have seen it. Our research associate, Aubrey, will present it next month, and we'll also bring hard copies to that meeting for you all. In other news, staff have been working with the City of Knoxville and City of Knoxville officials on implementation options to promote missing middle development. You'll recall Aaron Gill presented on that recently to you all. We are excited to see this work underway. Our agency also participated in the City of Knoxville's Open House series this spring. The fourth and final event was held last week for the West Side. It was hosted at Bearden Middle School, and planning brought staff to provide information to residents about transportation projects, to promote the many data tools that are on our website. And planning's work has received a lot of positive feedback via this open house series, and appreciation from City of Knoxville officials, elected representatives, and many other citizens. Now I'd like to introduce you to several new staff members that we have. I'm going to go through the list, and if those that I call out, because we have quite a few, will stand up, that would be great. Madison Lewis has been working part-time with planning this spring. She's part of the addressing team, and she just started full-time 2 weeks ago. We have been fortunate to have Madison help us while she's overlapping with Donna Hill, who many of you may know. Donna Hill retires after 31 years with the agency at the end of this month. Shelley Gray joined the front desk team a few weeks ago. And we have two new planners as well. Naomi Hansen joins the team from Washington State. And then we have Sam. He joins us from Tulsa, Oklahoma. You'll see these new planners at upcoming meetings. And we also have a summer in the city intern, Molly. There you go. Thank you. He is a student at the University of Tennessee focused on logistics and is interested in learning more about the planning world. So we are just really thrilled to have these team members with us. Okay, so now I'll introduce Mr. Sale. He's the Government Affairs and Policy Director for the Knoxville Area Association of Realtors, where he leads the association's housing market research and public policy advocacy initiatives. And prior to working at Carr, Hansen was a research assistant at the Baker Center for Public Policy, contributing to this center's research with the National Science Foundation. And in 2019, he also served as a research assistant to Mariana Wanamaker and the White House's American Workforce Policy Advisory Board. So we're really glad you're here.
Awesome. Thanks. Glad to be here. And I'm going to jump in. So I gave you all a report. It's 40 pages long, so I am condensing it to 10 minutes. So lots of economic trends were left out, but I encourage you to read it if you have time. So I will just go ahead and get started since there's a lot. I like to start these presentations about what's really going on right now. So just broadly speaking, the economy and the housing market are cooling in East Tennessee, but really not to the same extent as anywhere else in the country, particularly the West Coast. The West Coast is seeing some price declines. We're starting to see things accelerate. The second point is, remember that low home price advantage that we always brand ourselves as having? It's completely gone, and I'll show you a slide later on. And then lastly, the pandemic provoked some structural shifts in the housing market, or in other words, things that won't change year to year very easily. And I have a couple of slides on that, but there's a lot more in the report itself. So I will go ahead and move on. So just starting off, I took out the economic trends, and we're just going to go into what's happening in the housing market. So what happened in 2022? Residential home sales across the Knoxville area dropped 9% last year. That's the largest annual drop that we've had since the Great Financial Crisis. So very substantial. And what is even more substantial is that virtually all of that drop happened in the third and fourth quarters of last year. So it mostly happened
One quick question I want to interrupt. Is that in number of houses or in volume?
Yes,
Dollar volume?
number of homes.
Number of homes.
A very substantial drop, and it all happened in late last year. Secondly, home prices rose about 16.7%, which is one of the fastest pace of home price growth that we've seen in the region ever, with some of the more steep increases happening in some of the surrounding adjacent counties, but it was pretty substantial in Knoxville as well, not too different there. And then lastly, something that's important to mention is that we ranked number 6 for price growth last year in the entire United States. And this is not just a pandemic, everything's going to boom and bust and we'll be back to where we were. We have, in fact, outpaced the national average in home price growth in every single quarter since 2018. So this is a continuation of long-term trends.
Hanson, real quick question. When you say Knoxville, the city of Knoxville, Knox County, or
it is the Knoxville
MSA?
area, closer to the MSA.
Okay.
Is there any element of the slide previously where it's, Knoxville's done this, quarter after quarter, that's catching up? That we were so affordable that there's some component of just like getting up to where the rest of the market is?
There's a slide on it in just a second that'll give you a bit of a look at that. So inventory, you can see the blue bars are Knox County in particular, and then the orange is the Knoxville MSA. So you can see inventory did creep back up in mid-2022, but it's been falling and has stayed relatively low. Month supply, so the number of months it would take if we stopped listing housings, how long would it take us to run out of homes on the market? It's under 1 month, and 6 months is considered standard. So we're still really low on active listings and total inventory, and we don't think that's going to change all that much for a reason that I'll get to after. But you can see there, going back to 2016, we're a fourth of what we were inventory wise. So it is the price pressure will continue as long as we keep inventory this low. And this is the really important graph that I think is fairly staggering to look at. So the blue bar is Knoxville. The United States' average is up there in orange. And so these are homes that are actively listed on the market. So it's not sales, it's asking prices. But what's the median price of a home on the market? And what you can see is we've always been relatively affordable, about $25,000 below the national average. That has been the case, historically speaking, until mid-2022 when asking prices nationally started to drop and Knoxville just continued to go upward. Homeowners are not ready to take any less money for their property than they were in the height of the pandemic boom, and it's continuing. And when you're in such a low inventory environment, it is feasible in a way that it wouldn't be otherwise. And so as of April of this year, our median listing price is $50,000 higher than the national average, which is substantial. So yes, we're catching up in many ways, but we're also just growing at a rate that is, if we don't address it, will become a big problem for us. I know it's a really big topic of conversation. So this is looking at investor purchases. To what extent are investors impacting our market? So you can see that light blue bar is investor purchases. The dark blue is cash. Cash is not necessarily investor, but we did see an uptick in cash buyers. It's really probably because of record equity levels, plus we're seeing a lot of migration from some of the high-income cities where, you sell a $900,000 home and get the same home here for $400,000. So a lot of people paying in cash. But what you can see is that investor share of purchases has risen, although not by too much. I mean, pre-pandemic, we were around 9%. We're at 14%. It's definitely had an impact, but has it had a market level impact? I would argue no. And this measure actually kind of overestimates investors because we can't tell the difference between a regular investor and an iBuyer who is buying and putting that home right back on the market. And so it's not really taking away from the housing supply. And I will add to Freddie Mac and a couple of the National Association of Realtors have all put out research saying that investors have not had a market level impact on pricing, and they typically offer less than what a typical owner-occupant would offer for a home. So looking at the rental market, This is also one of the fastest growing in the country. And so this is just looking at what are change in effective rents for apartments. So what you can see here is nearly 20% year over year there in 2022. So really substantial. And that, after looking back to pre-pandemic levels, rents on average are almost 50% higher than they were pre-pandemic. So the rental market has really blown up. Our occupancy rate, which I think I stripped out of the next slide, is hovering near 99%. It is thankfully a little bit lower than that now, but we don't really foresee that it's going to drop all that substantially. You really want your occupancy rate to be around 93 to 94. We're expecting somewhere between 96 and 97. And the next slide is really important as to why. This is the number of apartment units that are currently under construction in the Knoxville metro. I will say most of these are in Knox County, and probably 75% of them are in the city of Knoxville. So we're seeing a lot of apartment construction, which is really good considering that our apartment vacancy rate, our apartments are virtually full at 99%. But you almost have 2,000 units that are currently under construction and scheduled to become available in the next 12 months. Will we see all of those hit the market in the next 12 months? Probably not. It's still hard to find a dishwasher these days, and so supply chain challenges are still an issue. So we expect that these are going to sort of slowly come onto the market, but it should appreciably slow rent growth, which is really good news for renters, given that we had the highest rent growth in the United States in 2022, according to NAR analysis. So really substantial on the rental side, which is important. When we're talking about, is this a supply problem or is it a bubble? Our vacancy rates across the board are exceedingly low relative to similar cities. So a lot of this price growth is just a fact of we don't have enough. So what does this mean for affordability? We measure it in a couple of different ways. This is a housing affordability index. So at 100 means that a typical household can afford the median priced home with a 10% down payment. And by that measure of affordability, housing affordability in the Knoxville metro is at its lowest level since the 1980s, which is substantial. The 1980s is, in fact, when interest rates were at 18%. So that is a huge part of the affordability challenge here. Now we're facing this double whammy of it's really hard to find a home at all, but it's really hard to find one that's affordable. And so it's pushed affordability down in a substantial way. So another method of this is what amount of money do you need to purchase the home that was sold, the median home in 2021 versus 2022. So this is showing you, you didn't see a huge, you saw a $45,000 increase in the median sale price, so pretty substantial, but what was most impactful was mortgage rates. And so you can see in 2021, around $56,000 would get you a median priced home. And by the end of 2022, that was $89,000. And I use the joke that I didn't get a $33,000 raise last year, and I think most people probably didn't. So it's not something that's easily weatherable for many different parts of our community, particularly teachers, police officers, some of the essential workers that we knew in the pandemic and realized how important they are. Those are the people that are increasingly pushed out of the market. And so one of the last measures of affordability that's really important to understand is, we measure affordability by what can you afford based off of the most recently sold house. Well, you can't buy the most recently sold house. So what is affordability relative to the homes that are actually listed on the market on any given day? And what we found in that analysis, given some assumptions, is that if you make $75,000 or less in your household, you can afford about 15% of listings that are on the market in any given day. So that's 2/3 of the population who can afford only 1/5 of listings at the bottom end of the market. So it's in part why the market continues to be competitive, and you continue to hear realtors say things are crazy, in part because the bottom end of the market, under the $400,000 price point, there's a lot of movement. There's multi-offers. It's softened at the top, but this bottom level has really not softened, and we're continuing to see price growth. And lastly, I think I stripped a slide out. So housing challenges, what are we facing moving forward? This is our big estimate and the big takeaway from this report. So we modeled, we wanted to see what number of housing units how many housing units are we short if we want to maintain our historic level of affordability. And so we used a similar methodology as NAR, as Freddie Mac, as Rosen Consulting Group, which is a well-known housing consultancy group. And what we found is that since the financial crisis, we have accrued somewhere between 22,000 and 25,000 housing units in terms of a shortage. So we're short that many housing units if we want to maintain the level of affordability that Knoxville has had historically, which is a really substantial number. And you can see there, we're really just getting back up to the historical average. So chipping away at that 20+ thousand housing unit shortage will require us building above and beyond that orange line for a number of years. So it is very substantial and something that if we want to continue to be the affordable place that we are or used to be in terms of house prices, we really have to figure out how we can deliver housing units in a cost-effective and efficient way that doesn't take all of our land and all of the natural beauty that is East Tennessee. And I added this one this morning. I think it's one of the most interesting. So this is just for Knox County. And so part of the shortage really is we didn't build enough, but it's also a mismatch in demographic trends versus the type of housing we're building. And so households are getting smaller. Nearly a third of Knox County households consist of a single person, and more than 60% are 1 or 2 person households. And what the problem is that there's a mismatch. So only 12, with a third of your population is single people, and only 12% of your housing stock is studio or 1-bedroom housing units. And so once you see, the number of empty bedrooms in Knox County is substantial. And so in part of the affordability crisis, part of the shortage is that people who might be a 1 or 2 person household are forced to buy a home with extra space, not because they necessarily want or need the extra space, but because it's simply much harder to find a smaller home. And we've seen, because of the demand for smaller homes, particularly as our population ages, you have retirees who might not want a huge home, might not want a yard to take care of, or at least a large yard, aren't able to find that particular piece of the market, in part because we put a lot of barriers into making those types of homes effective or buildable in a cost-effective way. And lastly, I will jump into, this is my one slide. There's more in here about why there's some structural challenges. This is the biggest point to take away. This is something that's not going to change. So this is looking at what is the distribution of outstanding mortgages in Tennessee by interest rate. And so once you do that analysis, 8 in 10 homeowners in the state of Tennessee are locked in with a rate below 5%, so almost 1.5 2 points below current interest rates, which has created a lock-in effect. I speak from personal experience. I can't afford the home that I live in now. I could have not, if I was buying today, I would never be able to live where I could. And so it's locking people into their homes, particularly if you made just enough money to afford your home. The prospect of giving up a 2.75 interest rate in exchange for a 6.5 interest rate is not attractive to most people, and and myself included, my mortgage payments would be in excess of $1,000 more relative to the interest rate. So a lot of people are locked in and staying put, which we foresee will keep a lot of homes off the market. And then the secondary impact of that is, if people do decide to move, we expect to see an uptick in the number of people who hold on to that property as an investment rental property and buy another home, in part because the interest rates are so cheap. It's cheap money, and those properties will cash flow in a way that if you had a 6.5 interest rate, you couldn't. So we think this is going to last quite a while, and as we all know, the predominance of a 30-year fixed rate loan means a lot of these numbers aren't going to change in the short term. And we were, almost 60% of people have a rate below 4%. And that was less than 20% just 10 years ago. So this is a structural impact, something that we've never encountered in the history of the United States. So what happens could be a little ambiguous, but we expect it's going to keep people put for a good period of time. And we're already sort of seeing that in our market. So this is active listings by year. You can see active listings hit a record low in 2022. And in 2023, they're hitting a record low again across their respective months. So we're already seeing an impact of people staying out of the market. And even though inventory this spring has seen a nominal increase, it's really the result of homes staying on the market more for longer than they were previously. Homes were getting snapped up very quickly in the pandemic. Now they're not, and it's helping to pump up inventory, but it's really limited how much inventory has actually grown, and we've seen it grow really, really nominally this year relative to past years. And I think that is it. So our State of Housing report's available on our website. We also have a monthly newsletter called Market Pulse that most of this information gets into before it gets into a report. And you also have a print copy of it. So I am thankful that to be with you guys today and happy to answer any questions if you have any.
First of all, I'd like to say that's a fantastic report. Great job.
Thank you.
My one question would be, when was the average household income, when was your latest figure for the average household income in East Tennessee?
2021.
2021. So it's not taking into account the paralegal coming in from California that's making $180,000 working from her house, whereas local job would be $80,000 or something.
Correct. We wanted, in that analysis, our intent was to capture local residents rather than migrants to Knoxville. We wanted to really get at what's the affordability for people who are currently living here.
Right.
I think we did adjust that. Actually, I'm mistaken. That number was adjusted up to the fourth quarter of 2022. Actually, we partner with Moody's Analytics, so we forecasted that based off of some of the income data that had been produced. So it's late 2022. So it's mostly a local resident thing. I mean, we do know from some data that the number of people out of town are purchasing more expensive homes and generally have a higher income. So it is overweighted towards local residents rather than migrants.
Okay, that's all I had.
Awesome. Thanks for great to be with you guys.
Thanks, Hanson. Real quick, are you doing this with county commission and city council?
Yes, we already did.
Great, thanks. Next, we're going to go through the agenda items that staff has picked to put on, and the first one is item number 21, Knoxville, Knox County Planning Staff.
I'll start this off, but then I've asked Jeff to also be here to answer any questions. So as you all may recall, this came before you I guess it was actually last fall. And then city council had reviewed it in November and then remanded it back to planning commission. But before that, they wanted to have a city council workshop, which was held on April 27th, which planning staff attended. So we don't have a presentation today for you, but just wanted to make you aware that this is coming back for you this week. And if you have any questions about that city council workshop, or there was a small public meeting that was held by council member Tommy Smith that was attended by staff, staff would be happy to answer those questions.
Amy, what was city council's issue?
I'll refer to Mr. Welch.
Mr. Phillips, could you speak in the mic, please?
I'd be happy to. What was city council's concerns?
I think they just wanted to get more background on the information. Where were their opportunities and what kinds of problems that have occurred with development? So codes provided some examples of where some development met the build-to setback guidelines and where some asked for variances or zoning change. So that was primarily it that they had those concerns with. And so there's really no direction that they gave us. The administration continues to be supportive, at least Department of Economic Development for the city is supportive of the Planning Commission's recommendation that you all passed in November. And as a sidebar, when I bought my first house in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, some of you may remember the interest rates back in the 1980s. 13%, thank you very much.
There was a slide presentation at the city council workshop. That might be good to send out to all of us.
I think we sent out with your packet.
Did you guys
It's
get
included in the packet.
Yeah,
Because it had the examples of the cases that
yes.
go before BZA.
Okay.
So they didn't come up with any revisions after that workshop because it sounded like they were each going to maybe have some.
No, not
Yes.
at the meeting itself. And we did, tell them that when it was coming before you, I sent out an email saying, hey, if you have any comments, revisions, and Councilman Smith had a community meeting that Mike attended with some of the businesses along Chapman Highway.
Yeah, the administration spoke of this as almost like a temporary fix.
Yeah,
And also in looking at some sort of longer term change around these zones.
Yeah.
Any idea on what would that include, like small area plans or corridor studies, sort of like the Bearden Village study, or what would that?
Yeah, I'm not sure, specifically what the recommendation, we have a slide of their, so basically it was to revisit the districts on a community-by-community basis during fiscal year 23, 24. And try to address any of the current standards that maybe need to be addressed. So it's how much the city administration wants to tackle in this upcoming fiscal year and whether that's going to be a high priority or not. But that was sort of part of the recommendation for that, to have more community public input.
I've got a question along those same lines. Can you sort of provide what a timeline would be like if the result is this passing and then communities are asked to have small area plans to impact areas that weren't included in this, or they're oddities and need some different treatment? What's the process for a community doing that, and what is the timeline for that actually taking effect?
That has not been discussed with the city administration and codes as far as how to proceed with that. It could be done on a corridor basis, similar to what Councilman Smith did for his corridor for Chapman Highway and bring the businesses, property owners together. That may be a potentially way to do that too. So,
What Councilman Smith did was simply raising the issue,
Yeah.
asking people, what do you think? What are the perspectives out there? I'm asking about beyond that, if that community, his or any others, decided that they did see some issues with this and that they did want to have some kind of small area plan to affect certain areas, what's the process for that and how long does that actually take to implement?
they'll take several months to close to a year, depending on the staff work program that we as planning has and how many requests there are for that type of approach. So, and again, this is a zoning district that covers the entire city, so you wouldn't really want to just change it by corridor either.
I was looking at Nashville's zoning code last night, and their build-to zones, basically it seems like their fix to it is to just create design overlays along certain corridors, which seems like it could be easy to fill into our code, have a Bearden Village design overlay or a West Hills, something like that.
Yeah.
Really, the city needs to invest in a new general plan. And that should have been done before we did a new zoning code, quite honestly. Maybe following the county's model, do a general plan first and then zoning later, but we went backwards. If there's a way that this commission can recommend to city council that they move forward with a new general plan, that would be my suggestion.
I have a question about the design overlay concept and how that differs from a small area plan? And that's for staff or whomever feels qualified to answer it.
Their code references multiple things where it's basically a build-to zone would be, it's kind of like an order of operations. First, it's what if there's a design overlay, and if there's not a design overlay, then it references a small area plan to kind of cascade what neighborhoods have come up with.
Mike, if you.
You can think of the South Waterfront Code or the Cumberland Avenue Code. It's very specific to an area. Has specific regulations associated with just that geography.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Number 22, City of Knoxville, and I think Peter or Chris, is it? Who's taking this one?
I'm not 100% sure. Either Mr. Halley or Director Aarons.
Child was here. How you doing? Peter Aarons. I'm the Director of Plans Review and Building Inspections. This amendment comes from my house, but we work really closely with Development Services Engineering because they regulate land as well. So most of the comments, a lot of it is providing. Okay. Most of this is just providing additional clarity and moving definitions to their appropriate location within the zoning code. But I'm going to defer to Mr. Howley to get into the details.
Thank you. Hopefully this is tall enough for me. In general, we have a stormwater and street ordinance that also regulates land development, and City Council had reached out to us and asked us if we could look at one aspect of when we are willing to sign off on a building permit. And a lot of that has to do with this idea of lot of record, and some people have heard about ward maps and things of that nature. A lot of that's been deemed as a little bit confusing, and in a lot of development of the past, we have projects where we have a house built, for instance, on a particular piece of property, and you look at one of our maps and it shows a lot line that runs down the middle of the building. You look at a different map, like a tax map versus a ward map, and they show something different. And that clarification and correction of those concepts were something that we were asked to look in by City Council. And a number of changes that we have proposed in our stormwater and street ordinance dovetail with what you're seeing proposed in the zoning ordinance today. Some of the definitions that are in this, they don't say the same thing as what we have in a different ordinance that is probably what I'd call the hierarchical ordinance. So part of this is to clarify and make sure that they are saying the same thing and we're referring to the same details, the same definitions, the same tools. Other aspects of it are the way it's defined in this particular version gives us a certain degree of flexibility, but the definition doesn't make sense, and it kind of is a little bit contrary to what the other ordinance says. And so the goal would be to move the flexibility into an area that makes more sense and create continuity between the two ordinances. At the end of the day, the goals are essentially that in certain circumstances where we have records that pre-existed prior to the formation of the planning department, before the Register of Deeds. The city has a lot of older areas of town where we have maps that were produced in a timeline that were not as well recognized under today's standards. And so this flexibility gives us the option to be able to issue building permits in areas that were done in the method for recording lots in their day. So things that were done 200 years ago, we still want to recognize those because they were done, as opposed to making them go through a full modern process. And so that's the gist of what the intent and the goals were behind this. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Next is item number 9, rezoning request, and Jesse.
Hello. Jesse Hillman, Senior Planner. This request, item number 9, is 6C23RZ. It's a 1.54 acre property on Valley View Drive. Sorry if you can't see that main screen. It's thinking about it. There we go. This is at the base of Sharps Ridge. The rezoning request is to go from RN1 to RN4. Valley View Drive is a major collector street with a CAT bus route, and the property is near the intersection of Fairway Road, which is a minor collector street. The property is also within the boundaries of the Alice Bell Spring Hill Neighborhood Association. The property has a former planned district overlay that is to be removed since there was never a development plan submitted under its prior planned residential RP1 zoning. There was a KGIS error that identified this overlay as a planned development instead of a former planned district, and this will be corrected in the staff report. As you can see, there is RN1 zoning in the immediate vicinity. RN2 zoning is nearby, and there are more intensive residential zoning districts nearby to the west. The most recent change of conditions worth noting began about 16 years ago with the development of the laser pointer, the Willow Place condominiums here and the Heritage Park subdivision here. These both began around 16 years ago, but Heritage Park was completed within the last year or so. Even though Willow Place is zoned RN3, it's developed with duplexes at a density that's equivalent to RN2, and none of these more intensive zoning districts here are built out to their maximum allowable density. The land use classification in the East City Sector Plan is medium density residential, which permits consideration of RN1 through RN4 zoning. As you can see, there are a range of housing forms in the area with single-family, two-family, townhomes, and multifamily developments. However, the subject property is part of a consistent row of single-family detached homes with forested backyards leading to the ridge. Staff is recommending RN2 zoning over RN4 at this location. RN2 is more consistent with surrounding development. The minimum lot standard for multifamily development in RN4 could permit up to 33 units with special use approval. RN2 still enables a moderate increase in density with a 5,000 square foot lot size for single-family development, and it has special use review for duplexes with a minimum lot size of 10,000 square feet. A rezoning from RN1 to RN2 here promotes residential infill in an area where there is capacity for it. Amenities include transit, community activity centers in the forms of public parks and a middle school, as well as nearby commercial nodes in both directions on Valley View Drive. RN2 also balances infill with oversight over duplex housing form. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Jesse, can you go back to the slide that had one more? One more. Yeah. It seemed, I guess, can you just say a little bit more about the choice to suggest RN2 for that particular parcel when it's completely surrounded by RN1? I see that the RN2's on, sort of diagonals there, but they're not contiguous and.
Yeah, so in part, it is because of the residential amenities in the area. There's a bus stop that's walking distance at this corner. It's on a major collector, near a minor collector. It's near commercial nodes. There's the Richard Leake Public Park and the Alice Bells Pool that are walking distance. So for those reasons, it was seen that there was capacity in terms of the residential benefits of the area to consider RN2 here.
And did I hear you say that this piece was RP1 at one time?
Correct.
What was the zoning, what was the density on it?
It was never, a development plan was never submitted.
Okay. What, was there a range though back then? There would have been a range.
There's a range.
Density range.
I remember off the top of my head. I have to look it up.
Let me see. I can look it up in KJS one moment.
It'd be in the old code.
Right.
When Mike gets back, he might remember off the top of his head. Mike, do you recall what the RP1
On Valley View, the
Density.
density, the range.
for RP1?
I want to say it was up to like 12 dwelling units per acre. It was pretty high.
Yeah.
While they're looking, does anyone know if comments, I know that I've read at least 3, but are any of them from persons who own property directly next to this? Or are they,
None of them have identified themselves as direct neighbors that I'm aware of.
Jesse, the sector plan shows it as medium density residential. And so within medium density, anything from RN2 to RN4 was acceptable, correct?
Correct.
And that would have supported that RP1 that I was asking about earlier with the higher density was where I was going with that. Just to,
Yeah, 24 dwelling units per acre.
yeah, that's too much. Okay. All right. Anybody got anything else? All right, moving on. Item number 20, 6B 23SU. Jesse.
This is I apologize for the mislabel here. This is a city special use for a 0.78 acre parcel at the corner of North Broadway, a major arterial, and Edgewood Avenue, a minor collector street. The special use request is for a drive-through facility for a cookout restaurant, which is a fast food chain. There is a CAT bus stop at the northwest corner of the property, right here. There is also the First Creek Greenway Trail, which you can see in green here, that goes up North Broadway and crosses over on Edgewood Avenue and terminates at the Edgewood Park and the library there. And this property is included in the Edgewood Park neighborhood boundaries. This lot is zoned CG2, general commercial, and it's part of a CG2 corridor, which is intended to promote mixed-use development in a pedestrian-oriented environment. Indoor commercial operations should be the primary use, with limited exceptions per special use approval, such as this one. The property is also part of an infill housing overlay, which doesn't apply to commercial development, but does reflect a prioritization of neighborhood character and stability in the Edgewood Park neighborhood. The CG2's dimensional standards require a corner side build-to zone of 0 to 10 feet, meaning the building should be near the sidewalk, which promotes pedestrian accessibility. The applicant requested a variance from this zoning standard in order to set the building back 30.5 feet, as you can see here. So it's set back here. This request was denied by the Board of Zoning Appeals last month. Part of the rationale for the denial was that the site plan does not provide walkable access from Edgewood Avenue, which conflicts with the CG2's district's pedestrian orientation. Currently, the property is a vacant bank building that had teller drive-throughs exiting onto North Broadway. You can see the bank is set closer to Edgewood Avenue, and there is pedestrian access to the building. This property is in an area where there is a concentration of fast food drive-throughs. There's a KFC adjacent to the north, and a Wendy's, and then a McDonald's and Burger King in close proximity. This property is part of the Broadway Mixed-Use Special District designation in the East City Sector Plan. This designation describes how the Broadway corridor changed significantly after the establishment of the Federal Highway Administration in the 1950s. It used to have a trolley line and was transit-oriented with slower travel speeds and shallower setbacks. This change to a road designed primarily for cars with larger setbacks, vast parking lots, and higher travel speeds. The plan describes a goal to improve walkability, support transit ridership, reduce parking, and buffer commercial and residential uses, as well as calming traffic. It's also noteworthy that the property falls partially within the 500-year floodplain, as you can see here. And that was the primary reason cited by the applicant for the Build 2 zoning variance, to set the building back outside of the floodplain. We are recommending approval subject to 8 conditions, several of which support transit, walkability, and residential buffering. This case has been controversial, with residents citing concerns about the impact of another fast food drive-through on their community's character and traffic issues. The conditions included in the approval are intended to bring the site plan more into compliance with the intent of the CG2 zoning district, as well as the mixed-use special district. One benefit of the plan is that it replaces 2 driveways. Those 2 teller driveways are removed and replaced with new sidewalk, as you can see here. So that does improve walkability and pedestrian safety. A CAT bus stop is currently located there, and it has no seating amenities currently. So one condition is to provide a seating amenity such as a semi-seat, as you see here. This would be provided in coordination with CAT operations staff, and this semi-seat is part of their bus stop improvement plan. The site plan currently exceeds its parking space minimum by 12 spaces, and another condition is to remove the 6 parking spots on the eastern border and replace that with a Class B landscaping buffer, just 20 feet, in addition to the existing proposed fence. There's also a 6 to 8 foot fence conditioned along this alley to protect this residential property from incoming drive-through traffic. What else? Lastly, the building entrance along Edgewood Avenue is currently inaccessible from the sidewalk. You can see there's landscaping here currently. So there's a condition that this be made accessible to the Edgewood Avenue sidewalk with patio seating. This would make it more of an amenity to the surrounding neighborhood. This open space seating amenity is mentioned in the rules of measurement in the zoning ordinance for the Build 2 zone as a feature that can be counted towards the Build 2 zone percentage. I had discussions with plans review and inspections, and they would consider this patio seating as a potential way to reduce that variance that was requested for the Build 2 zone. There is precedent for Cookout providing outdoor seating, as you can see in this picture here. And with the conditions noted, this would be more supportive of transit, pedestrians, and the adjacent residential community. Happy to answer questions.
The variances at BZA, would they have to go back?
Currently, they are considering appealing it to City Council, is my understanding.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're waiting to see how special use review goes.
If we approve this special use, did they reject all of the variances or just the one where there is now a patio?
There was only one variance requested at the
Okay.
May meeting.
So it would be approved then, essentially, right?
It would depend on how it's designed and making sure that it's compatible with how plans review and inspections assesses it.
Okay. Thank you, Jesse. Next is item number 30, concept and development plan, Whitney.
Okay, so this is a development concept plan for 47 attached lots on 7.87 acres. along Old Clinton Pike near West Emory Road. It's less than a quarter mile from a shopping center and a middle school on West Emory. This property is currently pending a rezoning at 6 dwelling units an acre, which includes a condition for providing a type B landscape screen along the agricultural zones. And that it means buffer strip should be a minimum of 12 feet in width. And these 47 lots will create a density of 5.98 dwelling units an acre. There is one alternative design standard that requires Planning Commission approval. The applicant is requesting a reduction of the lot frontage from 25 feet down to 22 feet for the attached units on individual lots. This request requires that guest parking be provided within the development. This site is located within the parental responsibility zone, and it's less than a quarter mile from a shopping center. So installing a sidewalk along the frontage of Old Clinton Pike will be required. Oops, sorry. Sorry about that. Oh, and one last thing. The Planning Commission also determines the height for anything other than houses or duplexes. So staff's recommending a maximum height of 35 feet for the attached units, which would be consistent with the surrounding development, and also recommending approval with all these conditions. Are there any questions?
What's the criteria you're using to justify going from 25 feet to 22 feet?
Sorry, can you say that again?
What's the criteria that staff is using to go from 25 feet to 22 feet for the frontage?
It's allowed within our subdivision regulations, and it's getting a few more, just getting up to that density that's allowed on the property.
Then if that's the case, why don't we just change the regulations to allow 22 feet wide? I mean, we're getting kind of arbitrary and capricious here. And
Yeah.
I say that the subregs require, sorry, it's me. It says that guest parking should be provided if lots are less than 25, have less than 25 feet of frontage. And that's kind of a subjective, there's nothing that says like how much parking is supposed to be provided. So we want this to come to the Planning Commission for consideration if they go less than 25. But as an alternative design standard, the Planning Commission can approve down to 20 feet. Anything less than 20 feet would be considered a variance, and that's where hardships become more of a concern.
typically, variances are based on issues of the property, topographic issues.
And that's
or
why this is
whatever
an alternative design standard.
Yeah,
This
this
isn't
is,
like-
this
It's an
is not a
alternative
variance.
design standard going from 25 to 20. Anything below 20 is a variance.
I get that. All right, number 35, development plan, Whitney.
And this is for a multifamily development along Middlebrook Pike, east of Bob Kirby Road. There are sidewalks currently along Middlebrook and a commercial node less than a quarter mile to the west. So per the county's sidewalk ordinance, a sidewalk will be required from the development to Middlebrook. And this development will be 128 units on 11 acres, which would be 11.7 dwelling units an acre on this PR, up to 12 dwelling units an acre property. So looking at the site plan, these 128 units will cover 5 different apartment buildings, including a clubhouse and a pool. There is an extensive landscape plan that will go along the frontage of Middlebrook, and it will also go around the property that's adjacent to these single-family residence subdivisions. This section of Middlebrook Pike is in the designated scenic highway corridor, and which requires maximum height for buildings to be 35 feet. This is an image of one of their 3-story buildings that are just under the maximum height of 35. So we are recommending approval with these conditions. Any questions?
Thank you, Whitney. Next one is item number 31 and 32, Cruise Farms. Mike.
Okay, and I'm going to let the big screen come on here in just a second, but this is a bit of a unique situation. We did accept this as two separate applications because it really is two independent subdivisions, even though it's under it's the same developer. And because it was being done at the same time, we did ask for a traffic impact study because they did go over the 750 trips per day. And I'll show you a bit more detail on which property is which, but the Cruise Farm subdivision is on the east side, on the right side, has 72 or 62 lots, and the other on the left has 55 lots. They're all attached units, varying in size. Some of them are less than 25 feet. Some of them are more like 34, 35 feet, I believe, wide. So it is, as you see, it is just, I'm going to turn on the laser pointer. So it is really close to the school campus here, and as well as other amenities. So one variance to note is that they are requesting an intersection separation for the Cruise Farm subdivision, which is on the east side. On a arterial street, the intersection separation is required to be 400 feet. They basically put their intersection between the two on the opposite side of the street. So 290 feet to one side, 310 feet to the other. Staff is recommending approval with conditions. So this is just a quick overview of the two together. So on the aerial, what you see in red on the right corresponds with the Cruise Farm subdivision on the right. And again, more like the mustardy yellow color on the left kind of gives you an idea where it's located on the property. There is a wetland that separates the two, and there's a substantial steep slope area on the south side of the property. They do intend to maintain a good part of that sloped area and the vegetation, which you can see. It's kind of hard to see here, but the green dashed line is approximate location of the hillside protection area. The kind of purple line here is their approximate disturbance limitation. So there you can see that there is a good amount of land being left undisturbed on the steepest side or steeper slopes. They do propose a walking trail between the two subdivisions. There is an amenity area on the western side, back here at the end of the cul-de-sac. They don't detail what that amenity is, but they do say they intend to provide an amenity. And again, just to give you an idea of some of the context here, they're off to the east of the school campus. There is a mid-block crossing on Hardin Valley and also a sidewalk crossing or crosswalk at the intersection with Steel Road. There is a small commercial node, including the Food City and some unbuilt commercial veterinary offices existing. And this area here is it was originally approved by the Planning Commission for 133 attached lots. I'm not sure if that's still the case or not. I assume it is. They are getting closer to actually building that out. Just to point out some things in the Northwest County Sector Plan, it does have Hardin Valley community discussion. It talks about updating the growth policy plan to extend the planned growth area where utilities are provided now. Obviously, utilities are much more extensive in this area than they used to be. Cul-de-sacs should be avoided where possible. On this site, unfortunately, it is what it is. There's really no opportunity for connectivity, unfortunately. Everything around it is built out. And it talks about conservation subdivisions as being a recommended type of development. I mean, I wouldn't say this is a conservation subdivision per se, but it does have those principles of clustering units, which I think was the intent there. the Hardin Valley Mobility Plan, which is from 2019. Two items that I said really the same item, but it's just different alternatives. Talks about potential widening of or improvements to Hardin Valley Road. One of those is to potentially widen it to 2 lanes each direction with a median. The other is to do more of a landscape median down the middle of the road. And that's still something that's pending, but I would suspect some type of improvement over time to Hardin Valley will be coming.
Mike, what does pending mean?
Pending means it'll happen sometime in the future. I don't know if county
what
engineering
does
has any
pending
idea of improvements to
Anybody?
Hardin Valley.
I mean, we have a lot. I mean, it's a lot out there. And, you know, it moves slowly. So, like Hardin Valley, is there anything in the line for Hardin Valley?
Not on this particular section. We probably, as part of our advanced Knox process, we may be looking at some capacity improvements west of Steel Road. But right now, this particular section, we don't have anything on the agenda at this point.
Thank you.
Getting back to the Cruz Farm subdivision variance request, is kind of this outlines again how that's set up. So their entrance road, like I said, is almost evenly split between the 2 subdivisions. They will need to do a little bit of restriping on the center turn lane in Hardin Valley to create a dedicated left turn lane into their subdivision. That will leave enough space for the left turn lane queuing at the existing Brighton Farms Boulevard to the east. There's really no changes that are needed to the west at the Brook Willow Boulevard. In this section of Hardin Valley Road, there is an existing center turn lane versus to the west where the Maya Hills subdivision, it does not have a center turn lane right now, so they're going to have to restripe to create that. It's kind of hard to see in this image, but it's pretty evident when you're out there. There is a fairly significant bank just in front of this Brighton Farms Boulevard. We did ask the engineer, why not just line up these intersections? It was pretty obvious why they didn't do it. But there are some underground utilities that are pretty high in that bank. Makes it challenging to put that intersection there. And the proposed intersection or access point, there was not a concern from staff from a safety perspective. It felt they could get the site distance that's required and the queuing links that are required on Hardin Valley Road. So we were recommending approval of those requests. Just trying to go through this real quick. I just mentioned that they need to restripe in front of the Cruz Farm intersection or access point. Further to the west, it's going to be a little bit hard to see on here, but you can see them in the PDF plans maybe a little bit better. This section of road, you can kind of see it down here. The center turn lane goes away, so they will need to restripe to push the travel lanes out towards the curbs, put in that center turn lane, and just restripe a little bit towards the queuing lanes at the schools. Anybody have any questions on this one? Similar to the last one we talked about, I didn't really go into the design too much of the subdivisions, but they do have some lots that are smaller, so they are less than 25 feet. I think they are down to 20, I believe. And they do have some bigger lots. So as I mentioned, the sub-regs say you should provide guest parking. On this one, we felt that there was enough opportunity for on-street parking to accommodate any guest parking. It's these bigger units, so there's going to be space between these units to actually have on-street parking. There might be some other opportunities for on-street parking as well, versus the other side. Not going to be able to see it here, but they actually do have some dedicated parking in the kind of mid-block here, and then they said they will also have some more dedicated on-street parking back at the amenity. Off-street parking at the amenity, and similar to the previous subdivision, they do have wider units that would accommodate on-street parking between driveways as well.
Is it possible to define what that amenity might be?
I mean, we can ask them. Yeah.
Be an appropriate question to ask the applicant during the meeting.
It just seems curious that it wouldn't be defined in any way in the plan that we're being asked to approve.
I think it has to do with the code. It's not specifically required to be defined, just that there is one that is an area that's identified or opportunity for the future.
Thank you, Mike. Next, item number 37, development plan. Mike?
Yeah, so I'll go over this real quick. This property was rezoned to planned residential up to 8.2 dwellings per acre. It was zoned agricultural prior. I believe they requested 10. Staff recommended 10, as Planning Commission recommended 10. Essentially, they just didn't need 10. They needed 8.2 to make it work. I think their project is just barely under 8.2 dwellings per acre. It is on Shad Road. They do have access to Shad. Technically, they do have frontage on Ball Camp Pike, but they are not providing any access to Ball Camp Pike. So I think that pretty much covers what I was going through there. So this site has been disturbed previously, unfortunately, because there is a stream that cuts through here. So you can see there's no vegetation left along that stream. There's also a wetland towards the Ball Camp Pike road frontage. There was a condition of the rezoning to provide a type B landscape screening along agricultural properties. Really, this was intended for the residential properties just to the southeast and to the west. So staff is recommending that, just as the condition requires, a type B landscaping along the west and along the east, southeast property lines. And they don't show, they show the western one on their plan. They do not show this southeastern planting area, landscape screening area. But because of the stream, let's just have to work out how that will work. It just, as long as there's landscape screening between the units, like their development and the property to the southeast, that's all I would be concerned about. The placement of those we'll have to work with them during the permitting phase and their grading plans and such to see where that landscaping actually ultimately ends up. To the east, it's kind of hard to see, but there's a church over on the east side that was just built. It is zoned agricultural. I think it makes sense for them to go ahead and provide some screening there. It's not part of the condition of approval. Let's see. I need to put this in the back because I realized it wasn't in there. They did provide a couple examples of types of units that they want to propose to construct. When I talk to people about this, they usually don't know exactly what they want to build yet. I say, give me something that gives you a sense for scale. So this is what they gave. So it could be something that's similar to these. Hopefully it's something along the lines that we see here. But really the scale is the big part for me, what I want to see. And I knew it was going to be probably a two-story structure. As they, I think they're showing duplexes for the most part, and I think there's two detached structures in here as well. Does anybody have any questions? And then this one I just wanted, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Did they get the utilities worked out?
Did they get the utilities worked out? I imagine there's still
a pretty heated conversation as to where there's sewer or not out there.
I'm sure that they're working that out.
But that's a condition, I'm assuming, of...
Yeah, they have to work with the utility districts to, it's usually the first condition in our report.
All right.
Can't really get too far without the utilities on this project.
Right. Item number 41, Mike.
Okay, so this one was before us last month for a similar use determination, or maybe it was 2 months ago. I can't recall now. maybe it was 2 months ago. It's a metals and plastics reclamation facility. It didn't really fit within any of the land uses, so we were making the determination of really whether in the industrial zone this use should be a use permitted on review or permitted by right, and ultimately it landed on use permitted on review. So this is in the Forks of the River Industrial Park. It is on the edge. Everything, I'll show you a zoning map here in a moment, but everything around this is zoned industrial, which is the heaviest or zoning classification in the county. So from that perspective, the land use makes sense here. Sorry, I just totally left the plain PR zoning on this one. I'm sorry about that. I was obviously a little bit quick to get through that. So look on the right side, don't look in the left. Ultimately, this is a recommendation for approval with conditions, so look at the bottom on the left. So this is their site plan. Originally, so when we saw it previously, they were thinking of having a building on the upper left-hand corner, which was much closer to Asbury Road. They decided to push that back. However, in doing that, they decided to not go with the building anymore. Now they're just going to have a concrete pad with their equipment their processing equipment sitting on that pad. One of the concerns was noise. Obviously, they do tend to still use the ball mills, which I was concerned about. They have their default practice is to use a ball mill with a neoprene liner on the inside, which reduces the noise substantially. So between the distance away from the road and the neoprene interior, that should take care of most of the noise concern. There's also other types of insulation they can do from the outside of the ball mill. They are working on a separate proprietary process that does not require a ball mill. At this point, they don't know if it's going to be ready for the construction of this site. So they're going forward with the idea of the ball mill. The other process does not include anything like a ball mill. It's going to be a lot less noisy. They didn't really tell me exactly what it was, but it did not include a round tube with balls, heavy steel balls bouncing off of metal. So hopefully they can get that installed instead of the ball mill, but I'm not too concerned with how they're moving forward with this site.
Mike, are they currently doing this now?
They do. They have several operations around I know at least in the southeast, I'm sure they're bigger than that, but yes, they do have similar operations. So just like I said, show you the zoning map on the left. It's all heavy industrial around here. There's concrete plants, transportation, like trucking terminals, steel or metals recycling companies. So it's a pretty intense area. There are 2 houses right across the street, and there are 3 houses down the way to the southeast. The industrial zone has a standard that says if you're a use permitted on review, you cannot be within 300 feet of a residential unit that is zoned agriculturally, or I'm sorry, not agriculturally, zoned in a residential zone district or in a residential subdivision. These properties are neither. They're not in a residential subdivision and they're not zoned residential. Does anybody have any questions? They have a pretty detailed operations description in their packet, so if you want to peruse that to see how they operate, that's a good place to start. That's it.
Thank you, Mike. Next is item number 5, Michelle.
Okay, so the first one I have to talk about today is a street closure, which we don't usually have an occasion to talk about at these meetings. This is a request to close the Eakers Road right-of-way in front of the last 2 properties on Eakers Street. As you can see, it's pretty short. It only extends from Haywood Avenue down 3 parcels. The applicant owns these 2 parcels here and would like to close this right-of-way to retain use of that land. The zoning map shows that the property across the street is not privately owned, and they're working with the city of Knoxville to obtain both sides. So typically when we close a right-of-way, it gets divided in half with each side going ownership to the property on the other side. So they're trying to get ownership of the entire thing. The issue with this one is if we did allow closure of Eaker Street and the applicant did retain property and add that to her parcel she's planning, it essentially creates a situation where you have a landlocked lot in this bottom parcel here. So Eaker Street would revert to this one and then revert to this one, and then this one would no longer have road frontage. That's a requirement of the subdivision regulation, so it would be creating a non-conforming situation. We could condition it that the applicant plat the property and provide an easement to the rear property, but there's no guarantee that that would occur. There's not really right now a mechanism when they're going through the building permit process for them to be looking at conditions of street closure cases, so it's likely that that would get lost in translation. So what we're recommending is closure of this last parcel here, and what that would do is basically have the road frontage here, so it's got its required frontage along Eakers along this part. The owner still retains the frontage along this part, and they can still use it. Right now, they're using the parking along here, and that wouldn't change with this recommendation. So that's, we've notified the applicant, and they'll be able to make their case to you if they disagree with the recommendation. So if there are any questions?
Would that change the desire of that person for the row, the chunk that is not owned at the moment?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
If you go back, this is your recommendation slide, but if you go back a couple and you show how the property, one more, there, the right side blob, that they're trying to acquire that as well.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. They're just trying to acquire this, but because this isn't privately owned, they would be able to retain both sides of the right-of-way. Okay. So the next one is number 26 on the agenda. It's 6H23RZ. This is a rezoning. They're requesting to go from agricultural to PR with a density of up to 5 dwelling units per acre. Planning is recommending 3.5 dwelling units per acre with the condition that the portion of the parcel with slopes of 25% or greater be left undisturbed. And we'll kind of get into that in a little bit. The aerial map just kind of shows contextually what's going on in the area. There's a subdivision built out here. This is a RV park, and then this is mobile homes and mobile homes. Right now, East Raccoon Valley Drive is classified as a major arterial, so no traffic would be routed through smaller residential neighborhoods to reach this site. Although Raccoon Valley Drive is pretty narrow, it's only 19 feet wide. Sector plan map shows this property designated as LDR, which, as you know, allows consideration of up to 5 dwelling units per acre. The zoning map shows a mix of zoning in the area, predominantly agricultural, but there's also RA, PR up to 3.5, some commercial zoning, industrial zoning over here at the interchange to the interstate. So this is kind of the basis for our recommendation of 3.5 per acre versus the requested 5, is just to be more in character with what's going on in the site or in the area. And this is a bird's eye view that kind of shows a little bit more clearly what the build out currently looks like in that area. So really, aside from the RVs and the mobile homes, it's pretty rural, pretty low density. There are some site constraints. Right now, there is a blue line stream coming through here, so the applicant will be required to work with TDEC if they want to cross the streams. And there's also some pretty significant slope on the site. So the rear of the site goes along this ridge line that comes through here. It's like a longer ridge system. And so a good part of the rear portion of the site has 25% or greater slopes. And so the slope analysis recommends a disturbance area maximum of 2.96 within the HB portion of the site. And so that 2.73 dwelling units per acre that it's also recommending, the combination of those two yields 36 dwellings. The requested 5 dwelling units per acre could result up to 62 dwellings, and then planning's recommendation of 3.5 dwelling units per acre could result in up to 43, so just as a comparison. And again, just like we mentioned earlier, due to the adverse impacts that could result from clearing and grading these significant slopes at the rear of the property, we're requiring for them to, or proposing a condition to require them to leave that portion of the site undisturbed. Also, because of the number of dwelling units, depending on what they do end up with, if it goes over 70 dwellings, they would need to have some sort of traffic study. That would be determined later. Any questions about that one? Okay, the last one is number 27 on the agenda. Uh-oh, lost a screen. There we go. Okay, so this one, they're also asking for ag up to 5 dwelling units per acre, and similar to the last one, we're recommending 3.5 with that same condition. The aerial map of the area, it's a pretty big piece of property, and there are some subdivision build-outs along through here, but very few. Looking at this, and the Napello Road is also a classified road similar to the last one, but it also is very narrow, 19 feet. Sector plan has it as LDR, and it's also in the HP area. And then the zoning, you've got 2.1 dwelling units per acre down here, 3.1 here, and then this is Norris Freeway. Across that is 4 dwelling units per acre. So even though that's higher, because it's across Norris Freeway, it feels very disconnected from this site, somewhat disjointed. And so we're recommending 3.5 to be closer in line with what's going on down here with the RA and the 3.1 in the near vicinity. This is a bird's eye view of the property here, just to give you a little more context. And again, this some severe slopes on a smaller portion of the site. So both rear corners have that 25% or higher. So there's that same condition for them to leave those undisturbed due to the adverse impacts that could result from clearing and grading the area. The SLIP recommended disturbance area is 24.58 acres out of the total 40 acres. And then it recommends a density of 2.65 dwelling units per acre. So when you combine that, it gets you to 106 dwelling units potentially, and compare that with the requested 5 dwelling units per acre, which could result up into 200 dwellings, and then planning's recommended 3.5 dwelling units per acre, which could result in up to 140 new dwellings. And that would definitely require a traffic impact analysis, scope determination to see what they're going to do and what road improvements, if any, would be required at that time. Any questions about that one? Okay, thank you.
That is it. Any other items that commissioners have to bring up?
Chris, I've got something. I've got a call today on item number 7, which I'm surprised is not on our list today to discuss because the staff's recommended denial. I'm just curious if Jesse could kind of brief us a little bit on that item.
Is this the Victor Jernigan? Yes, I'm glad you brought this one up because we are recommending denial. It was postponed. Okay, so this request is to go from the MDRO, medium density residential office. Here, sorry. Sector plan designation to the mixed use, to an extension of this mixed use special district. That's part of the Central City sector plan. And this would allow for a rezoning to the CG2 commercial zoning district. We determined to deny this because it would be an intensive encroachment into this residential area, which is still residential. There's a trailer park here. These are single-family lots. There's a duplex here. I do believe Mr. Jernigan is planning to share his concept for what he'd like to do here, which is residential in nature, but because we have to consider all the potential uses with the commercial zoning district, we determined it was an intrusive, an encroachment into this residential area. Also in the sector plan, it described how further study would be needed if this mixed-use district were to be extended, and that has not occurred. So for those reasons, we recommended denial.
Is there any other zone that the owner could consider that where he could accomplish his residential intent without going to this zone?
We did discuss several alternatives, and he determined that the CG2 zoning district provided the setbacks and the dimensional standards that he needed to do what he was trying to do.
Okay.
What's the maximum RN zone in MDRO? RN 6?
6, RN 6, yeah.
And within the MU, the sector plan part of the application, what's the highest RN zone within that sector plan designation?
Sure, let me pull that up. Okay, so yeah, medium density residential, office, general commercial. So general commercial allows for residential development as well. That can be more intensive.
Yeah, not RN 7.
It's not calling for high density residential. You can't really read that, can you? And because of that commercial zoning, that's why he asked for the extension of the mixed-use district.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Did you get your answer, Commissioner? All right. Mr. Phillips, did you have something?
Yeah, this has nothing to do with that. I was just curious if staff has ever looked at comparing what properties we've rezoned over the last several years versus what has actually been submitted for concepts. Curiosity, it could be.
No, we haven't, but that's a good analysis to conduct.
Yeah, it'd be kind of interesting to see how many acres or lots that potentially could be created, and is it for speculation or is it for?
Well, through our, through the development activity report, you could take a look at that. I mean, we could compare, how many applications you all reviewed, and then how many plans were approved, how many permits were issued. So it'd be fairly easy for us to connect those dots.
Is that it? I guess we're dismissed. You'll have Chair Hill back Thursday. Thank goodness. See you.